What's up, webheads? I'm Steven from the Hills Maniacs, and today I'm going to be continuing my series of reviews on every live-action Spider-Man movie. Today I'm moving into the Tom Holland MCU Spider-Man movies, starting with Spider-Man Homecoming. So the biggest issue I actually have with this movie and all of the MCU Spider-Man movies in particular is that they kind of took away from it being only about Spider-Man. I feel like they tried to connect it too much to everything else going on in the MCU, because you have Tony Stark showing up in this movie like a whole bunch. Tony Stark is the one who invented the Spider-Man, or who gave Peter his Spider-Man suit. So, they took away from Peter being the one who creates his own Spider-Man suit, because Tony gives him, basically an Iron Man suit, but it's, designed to look like Spider-Man. It has all the same kind of technology that, his Iron Man suits have. He has a voice person that he can talk to, like what Jarvis was. It's got all the different options for, web slingers and everything else. So it's Tony Stark gave him that. Tony Stark shows up in this. I get that they were trying to make him the mentor figure for Peter so that it hits even harder later on, in Avengers Infinity War, when we see, Peter gets dusted away with a lot of the other characters, and then Tony has to kind of deal with that. They tried to show the father and son relationship between the two of them, but I feel that kind of hindered this whole movie of it being basically an MCU origin story for Spider-Man and Peter Parker. So, I feel it took away from that. And I said this in my video I did a few weeks ago, where I talked about, after seeing the Spider-Man No Way Home trailer, where I said the problem with that was that there's too much Doctor Strange in it, and it almost feels like a Doctor Strange movie featuring Spider-Man rather than a solo Spider-Man film. So I kind of feel like that took away from that. And that's what you don't want to do. And especially in this movie, because the way they did it, they had to build off of Captain America Civil War, so they had to continue Peter's story following that before getting into what all the other Avengers are doing leading into Infinity War and everything else. But the fact that they had Tony Stark show up in this movie a lot almost kind of takes the spotlight off of Peter Parker. Instead of, I get what they were going for, trying to make him the mentor, but it kind of messed that up. I feel like what they should have done with this movie was maybe have it be an actual origin story of Peter Parker, of Spider-Man in the MCU. So kind of have Civil War happen, but then have this be a backtrack to show what Peter was doing before this point and how he got Tony's attention to get Tony to come and recruit him to his team in Civil War, Team Iron Man versus Team Captain America. What they could have done, they still could have had the Adrian Toomes stuff, or the Vulture, which is what they had in this movie. Him and his group of thieves basically were stealing and using all this technology from the Battle of New York or the battle against Ultron, everything the Avengers have been doing, and all these battles that have been taking place in different things throughout the MCU. They were stealing the technology that's being cleaned up from that, the alien tech from the Battle of New York and everything else, and sort of repurposing it to use it to steal money and things like that. So they were trying to so they were becoming rich off of all the destruction caused by the Avengers and everything else. That you can still have in this movie. I feel like it still works that way, because it's still that way it still shows the connection to the MCU, and it doesn't really mess with the timeline or anything like that of when everything is taking place, because this can take place in between a lot of the stuff that's going on, or at the same time as all of that, before it leads into Captain America Civil War and things like that. So that's fine. That makes sense. That's kind of how they made Vulture become a villain in this movie, because he's taking all this stuff from the Avengers and things like that. Even the ending of the movie was him trying to steal the plane of all these new items that Tony Stark created for the Avengers. They were being shipped to the new Avengers compound, which we saw at the end of like Age of Ultron and everything like that. And even in Civil War, it still was here. So we see him shipping it from Stark Tower to the new Avengers facility because Tony Stark sold Stark Tower, and we see that throughout the rest of the MCU going forward, that it's being rebuilt and all this other stuff because somebody bought it. And then, Vulture tries to like steal that, or take the whole plane filled with everything so that they can, steal all that technology and all the things in there as well. So that's fine as like a plot device to use for that, but I feel like what they should have done for the rest of the stuff was leave Tony Stark out of this completely. Don't even have Happy Hogan show up or anything like that. Have Peter build his own suit. He's just the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. We don't even have to see the backstory of how he got bit by the spider and his Uncle Ben dying and everything else, because we've seen that already. That's why they didn't include it. We've seen it in 2 different adaptations of Spider-Man, and really every adaptation we've ever seen, even animated stuff. We see Uncle Ben get killed and all this other stuff, and that's what leads him on his journey. So we didn't really need to see that again. I feel like they did a good job keeping that out of there because they wanted to show the point of that this is like a whole new experience, a whole new Spider-Man, in the MCU. We've seen the backstory. We all know the backstory, so they didn't want to include that. Like everything else, or everything that they were showing in this movie with Peter Parker was fine. Just take out all the stuff with Iron Man. Don't have Tony Stark come in and take back the suit because he feels Peter's irresponsible. Like, don't even have Tony Stark showing up in this movie. Everything else seems to work fine. You have the whole thing with him trying to get up the courage to ask a girl to the homecoming dance, but then it turns out that Adrian Toomes is her father. So now, and he knows that he is the Vulture and he's the one stealing everything. So now Peter has this conundrum, do I fight this guy now, even though I'm trying to ask I'm taking his daughter to homecoming and everything else. So they did a good job showing that stress level there. His best friend finds out that he's Spider-Man. So you have all the typical Spider-Man stuff that goes on in Spider-Man's life, just like we've seen in the other Spider-Man movies, where he's trying to balance his identity as Peter Parker and his identity as Spider-Man. That all was fine, but take out all the Tony Stark stuff and you have this whole new story, and then, the movie could have ended the same way it did, with him saving the plane from being stolen by Adrian Toomes and his group, and then maybe that's what gets Tony's attention to then bring him in and be like, I'd like to recruit you for this thing, for my team against Captain America. That could even cut into the scene from Civil War that we see where Tony shows up at Peter's house to recruit him and talks Aunt May into letting him go for his internship. Or, he claims that he has an internship for him, and he gives him the internship, and then he goes off and joins him in his fight in Civil War. So you could have had the movie, they could have had the movie connect that way and then end it. That's where Tony Stark shows up. I just felt like Tony Stark was in this movie too much, to the point where it almost felt like another Iron Man movie. This could have been called Iron Man 4, with Tony Stark showing up and training this new Iron Man, basically, is almost what it felt like, rather than being its own Spider-Man movie. And even they do this in Spider-Man Far From Home, which I'll get into more when I review that one in my next video, with Mysterio basically being an enemy of Tony Stark's rather than Peter Parker's. Again, it still ties into Tony Stark. They put too much emphasis on the other heroes that are helping Peter in the MCU, rather than just making solo stories for Peter Parker like they do with everybody else. The first Iron Man movie was all about Iron Man. There was no other hero that showed up to help him. Thor didn't show up to help him in that. Captain America didn't show up. So all these things, all these other heroes got their own movie with their own origin story and didn't really have another hero necessarily showing up throughout the whole movie, or at least if they were there. For example, Captain Marvel, Nick Fury's in the movie, but he doesn't play a huge role in it. He does help her, but he doesn't overshine her. And I feel like that's what Tony Stark did in this movie. So if they had just taken out the Spider-Man, or the Iron Man stuff that happens in this movie. I feel like it's a pretty decent Spider-Man outing, and they still could have connected it to the MCU without having too much of another hero showing up in this. I don't feel like it necessarily ruined the movie, like, to the point where it's like, I don't want to watch this movie ever again, but like, I just feel like they could have done without Tony Stark. But let me know what you guys thought of this movie down in the comments section. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. In the next video that will be coming up tomorrow, I will be talking about Spider-Man Far From Home. And then the week after that, I will be concluding this series with my review of Spider-Man No Way Home, so keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you for watching this video, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.
Subscribe.